On August 19, 2012, a devastating crime unfolded at the Sand Bay Resort in Naswaupe, Wisconsin. 21-year-old Alisha Bromfield, a vibrant young woman from Plainfield, Illinois, was 6.5 months pregnant with a daughter she planned to name Ava Lucille. Alisha had traveled to the resort to attend the wedding of her supervisor, Brian Cooper's sister, a trip she felt compelled to make due to workplace pressures. That night, after an argument stemming from Alisha's refusal to rekindle a romantic relationship, Cooper strangled her in their hotel room. Tragically, both Alisha and her unborn daughter lost their lives. This heinous act not only ended 2 innocent lives, but also sparked a legal battle that would challenge existing laws and inspire a movement for change. Alisha Bromfield-Anicich was full of promise, bright, determined, and on the verge of a new chapter in life. At just 21 years old, the Illinois native was 6.5 months pregnant and preparing to welcome her baby girl, Ava Lucille, into the world. While pursuing her degree in forensic psychology and criminal justice at Western Illinois University, Alisha worked tirelessly to build a future for her daughter. She'd been employed at Home Depot in Plainfield since she was 16, a job she cherished not just for the stability it offered, but because its seasonal nature gave her paid winters off, ideal for balancing work, studies, and soon, motherhood. She planned to return to that job after Ava's birth. But behind the scenes of her everyday life, a troubling presence loomed. Brian Cooper, her supervisor, and the regional manager for Home Depot's garden centers across northern Illinois, had developed a disturbing fixation on her. Despite Alisha's repeated efforts to keep their relationship strictly professional, Cooper grew increasingly obsessive. He held control over her schedule, assignments, and working conditions, and he used that power to blur boundaries. Although Alisha occasionally walked his dog or saw him outside of work, it was never more than friendly. Still, he refused to accept that she wasn't interested. He harassed her persistently, using veiled threats about her job to keep her within his reach. For 5 years, she endured this dynamic, juggling her ambitions, her pregnancy, and the unwanted attention of a man she never welcomed into her life. What should have been a time of joyful anticipation for Alisha was clouded by a dangerous obsession, one that would soon end in unthinkable tragedy. What was supposed to be a simple weekend trip among friends ended in horror. On the early morning of August 18th, 2012, a Saturday, 21-year-old Alisha Bromfield set out on a road trip from Plainfield, Illinois to Door County, Wisconsin. She was accompanied by Brian Cooper, her 36-year-old supervisor at Home Depot, who had invited her to attend his sister's wedding. The drive took nearly 4 hours. They checked in for a one-night stay at the Sand Bay Beach Resort. Though Brian had made repeated attempts to pursue a romantic relationship with Alisha, she had only agreed to accompany him as a friend. They had never dated. At the time, Alisha was almost 7 months pregnant with a baby girl she had already named Ava Lucille. The child's father, a college acquaintance, had chosen not to be involved, and Alisha, resilient and full of determination, planned to raise her daughter on her own. They were due to return to Plainfield the following day, but Alisha never came home. In the early hours of August 19th, Brian Cooper walked into a gas station and told the clerk he needed to report a murder. Moments later, he called 911 and calmly informed the operator that the murder had happened the night before. The body, he explained, was still in the room at the resort, and he admitted he was the one responsible. When asked by the dispatcher if it had been accidental or intentional, Brian responded that it was intentional. He added in a chilling tone that he was a good person apart from what he had done, and that Alisha's family, and everyone else, was going to flip out. Police arrived at the gas station and arrested him on the spot. While Brian gave a full confession at the station, officers rushed to the Sand Bay Beach Resort. There, they discovered Alisha's lifeless body. She was lying on the floor, her head resting gently on a pillow. Her body was unclothed, though a blanket had been draped over her chest. Bruising and scratch marks were visible, evidence of a violent and final struggle. What had begun as a reluctant favor to a persistent co-worker turned into a nightmare no one could have foreseen. A young woman and her unborn daughter, full of life and promise, were silenced forever. The night began with vows and celebration. but it ended in betrayal, heartbreak, and tragedy. Brian Cooper recounted to police what had unfolded in the hours leading up to Alisha Bromfield's death. According to his statement, the pair had attended his sister's wedding together. Earlier that day, however, tension between them had already begun to simmer. An argument erupted before the ceremony, so serious that Alisha called her mother, Sherry Anicich, to say she was heading home and skipping the event altogether. Sherry was stunned. Brian had an important role in the wedding. He was supposed to walk his sister down the aisle. A few hours later, when Sherry followed up by text, Alisha assured her that things had smoothed over and they had decided to stay after all. Behind that brief text, though, the truth was more complicated. Brian would later tell police the fight had centered on his desire for a romantic relationship with Alisha, something she had repeatedly rejected. She had made it clear, when they returned to Plainfield, their friendship would end for good. Still, the wedding went on. Brian fulfilled his duties during the ceremony, and afterward, the two returned to their room at the Sand Bay Beach Resort. Alisha, 7 months pregnant and emotionally drained, went straight to bed. Brian, meanwhile, stayed awake and continued drinking alone. He told detectives that he sat stewing in silence, thinking obsessively about her words and the finality of what she had said, that their friendship was over. Hurt and bitter, he began pacing the room, wrestling with disturbing thoughts. He confessed that the idea of harming her had crossed his mind. Eventually, he got into bed beside her. Alisha stirred, waking briefly. According to Brian, he asked her if she would watch a television show with him when they returned home the next day. It was a question that would never be answered. What followed turned a wedding weekend into a horrifying crime scene and ended the lives of both a young mother and the unborn daughter she would never get to hold. What began as a firm no from Alisha turned into the final moments of her life, moments marked by desperation, terror, and unspeakable cruelty. Brian told police that after Alisha rejected his request to spend time together once they returned home, something in him snapped. Fueled by alcohol and a festering obsession, he lunged at her and began strangling her with his bare hands. Alisha, lying on the bed, pleaded with him to stop. She begged him to think about the baby, his hands tightening around her throat as she fought back. She bit him in a desperate attempt to free herself, causing them both to roll off the bed. But Brian did not let go. He continued choking her until her body went still. Then, the horror deepened. Brian admitted to officers that once Alisha was dead, he undressed her, saying he wanted to see her unclothed. He then committed a final violation. He assaulted a lifeless body. Afterward, consumed by what he had done, he claimed he tried to take his own life, but he couldn't follow through. That night, he slept in the bathtub. The next day, he said he attempted to drown himself in the bay, but again failed. Defeated, he walked into a gas station and calmly informed staff that he wanted to report a murder. When the 911 operator asked if it was an accident, he said it wasn't, and then tried to justify it by saying he was a good person besides what he did last night. Alisha's unborn daughter, Ava Lucille, didn't survive the brutal attack. Brian was charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one for Alisha and one for her baby, and third-degree assault of a corpse. Despite confessing, Brian entered a plea of not guilty at trial. The jury heard his chilling confession and listened to the 911 call. Prosecutors laid out a case that revealed a pattern of disturbing obsession. Investigators had found voyeuristic footage on Brian's computer, videos of Alisha, secretly recorded. He had hidden cameras positioned in his home, including one facing the toilet, and used them while Alisha was there walking his dog. Incredibly, he even brought a camera to the resort and concealed it inside a trash can in the bathroom. It captured footage of Alisha stepping out of the shower. Alisha's friends testified that she hadn't wanted to go on the trip but felt pressured to attend the wedding. Brian had previously threatened to reduce her hours at work if she didn't comply with his demands. The defense argued that Brian's actions were the result of voluntary intoxication, claiming he had been too drunk to understand what he was doing. He took the stand and described how much he had consumed and the state of mind he claimed it left him in. But the evidence of control, coercion, and calculated obsession painted a chilling picture, one that a jury would soon be forced to confront. The courtroom was stunned, not by what the jury decided, but by what it couldn't. Despite Brian Cooper's full confession, one in which he recounted with chilling clarity every step of Alisha Bromfield's murder, the jury at his first trial couldn't reach a unanimous verdict on the 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Prosecutors had hammered home the contradiction. If Brian was as intoxicated as he claimed, how could he recall every moment with such disturbing precision? His defense of voluntary intoxication, they argued, was nothing more than an attempt to excuse a calculated, deliberate act. The jury did convict Brian on 1 charge, third-degree assault of a corpse. However, the inability to decide on the murder charges forced the judge to declare a mistrial. What followed was a second trial, and this time, justice was not delayed. Brian was convicted of both counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one for Alisha and one for her unborn daughter, Ava Lucille. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison with no possibility of parole. But the outcome of the first trial left a scar that Alisha's mother, Sherry Anicich, refused to let fester. Furious that Wisconsin law had allowed a man to argue he was too drunk to be responsible for a double murder, Sherry launched a tireless campaign to change it. And she succeeded. Her advocacy led to the removal of the voluntary intoxication defense from Wisconsin statutes. In a ripple effect felt across the country, 31 other states followed suit, closing a loophole that once allowed intoxication to soften even the most heinous of crimes. Yet Sherry didn't stop there. Once Brian was sentenced, she turned her focus to a civil case, this time against Home Depot, Alisha's employer. Sherry believed the corporation shared the blame for what happened to her daughter. After all, Brian was not just a man obsessed with Alisha, he was also her direct supervisor. Sherry argued that the company had a duty of care to protect Alisha from a colleague who had power over her hours, assignments, and schedule, a duty they had failed to uphold. She sought accountability not only for Brian's cruelty, but for the systemic negligence that may have allowed it to happen. Alisha's murder, then, became more than a criminal case. It became a fight for justice across courtrooms, criminal and civil, and a mother's mission to ensure her daughter's death would change the law, protect others, and never be forgotten. Determined to seek justice beyond the courtroom, Sherry stepped forward as the administrator of the estates of both Alisha and her unborn daughter to hold those she believed responsible accountable. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Home Depot USA Incorporated, Grand Service Limited Liability Company, and Grand Flower Growers Incorporated, the companies that jointly employed Brian Cooper as a regional manager overseeing multiple garden centers. Her complaint painted a disturbing picture. Brian was a man with a well-documented pattern of inappropriate conduct, verbally abusing and physically intimidating female employees under his supervision. Despite repeated complaints, the lawsuit alleged, the companies turned a blind eye, failing to protect vulnerable staff or take meaningful action. Sherry revealed that Alisha had confided in her about the mistreatment she endured at work, and that she was far from the only woman caught in Brian's toxic control. The core of the lawsuit centered on the assertion that Brian exploited his power as a supervisor to coerce Alisha into attending his sister's wedding, a personal trip she might never have agreed to otherwise. Sherry argued that fear of retaliation and job insecurity left Alisha feeling compelled to comply, trapping her in a situation that ultimately led to tragedy. The 3 companies insisted they bore no responsibility for Brian's actions outside of work, arguing that since the incident occurred during a personal trip and off-company grounds, they could not be held liable. The district court initially agreed. However, this ruling was later overturned on appeal. The appeals court examined Brian's concerning history of inappropriate conduct toward female colleagues. Among the troubling accounts was Jessica's. She had experienced repeated obsessive behavior from Brian that made her feel unsafe. According to testimony, he made highly inappropriate comments of a personal nature and physically crossed boundaries. Jessica bravely reported the situation to a group leader who confirmed that others had come forward with similar complaints, even admitting she felt uneasy working around him. Eventually, Jessica left the company to escape the toxic environment. After Jessica's departure, Brian's attention shifted to Alisha, who had joined the workplace as a teenager. The court heard how he referred to her possessively and publicly degraded her using offensive slurs. His control extended into her personal time. He manipulated her schedule, withheld breaks if she had social plans, and frequently messaged her after hours. He also forced her to attend business trips with him, at one point insisting they share a hotel room. During the appeals court proceedings, the companies faced a powerful argument. They were liable because Brian's misconduct was no secret to senior management. Despite multiple reports of his troubling behavior, including Alicia's plea to her group leader that she did not want to be left alone with him, Brian remained in charge as her supervisor. Though he was ordered to attend anger management classes, he never completed the initial course. When he confronted the human resources manager about the requirement, he was told to undergo further sessions, but that mandate was never enforced. The court also considered the chilling lead-up to the fatal wedding trip. Brian had initially asked Alisha to accompany him to his sister's wedding in 2012, and she refused. In response, he threatened to either fire her or slash her hours if she did not comply. Terrified, she agreed, and tragically, that trip ended with her murder. The judges expressed deep concern over these facts. Judge Hamilton emphasized, Cooper was not on the defendant's premises when he killed Alisha, nor did he use their property. But he wielded something far more powerful given to him by the defendants, supervisory authority over Alisha. He threatened to take what the Supreme Court describes as tangible employment actions, firing her or cutting her hours if she refused to attend his sister's wedding. This power existed solely because the defendants made him her supervisor. Home Depot argued that even if it had foreseen Brian's harassment escalating from verbal abuse to physical violence, it could not have predicted the horrific act of murder. The appeals court made it clear that the ultimate decision should rest with a jury, emphasizing the alarming progression of Brian's conduct, beginning with inappropriate private remarks and unwanted touching, escalating to retaliation and constant surveillance at work, and culminating in public outbursts, verbal abuse, and outright physical intimidation. The court stated that any reasonable jury could conclude the employers should have anticipated that Cooper might cross the line from harassment to outright violence. The court's ruling sent the case back to the U.S. District Court with a pivotal question for the jury to resolve. Did Brian exploit his supervisory power over Alisha to coerce her into attending his sister's wedding in Wisconsin? If the jury finds that he did use his authority to compel her presence, the three companies could be held legally responsible for the tragic deaths of Alisha and her unborn child. What happened to Alisha Bromfield and her unborn daughter Ava was not only senseless, it was preventable. A young woman full of promise, Alisha worked hard to build a life for herself and her child. Instead, she became the victim of a man who could not accept rejection, who believed control was his right, and who took two innocent lives because of it. In the wake of this tragedy, Alisha's mother, Sherry Anicich, has become a powerful voice for change. Through tireless advocacy, she helped introduce Alicia's Law, aimed at improving protections for victims of domestic violence and preventing similar tragedies from occurring. But no law can bring back Alisha or Ava. What remains is a void, one felt by a family, a community, and all who hear her story. Let Alicia's legacy be a reminder. We must listen when someone says they feel unsafe. We must act before it's too late. If you found this video compelling, leave a like and your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe and watch our other videos.